Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Alex Cabrera. We're at his home in Sherwood. It's February 24th, 2021. Alex, thanks so much for having us here today. First question for you, and the most important one to get started. Why wine? Why viticulture?
Why wine? I would say nothing is as romantic or emblematic as like, oh, I drank some Chateau Margaux or some Unico, and that made me an epiphany to go to the wine world. I just kind of started from school. I was in the science majors in biochemistry, biophysics at OSU. I was not thinking about anything alcohol related other than Absolute vodka, maybe, in my pre-drinking years. So why wine became like this long-winded kind of bit by bit, just kind of stepping stone. And I think the backbone of that is science related, because that's what I wanted to do in high school. That's what I wanted to do when I was little. I wanted to be a doctor, wanted to be, all that, but then I didn't like blood and guts. And so obviously I realized pretty quickly into anatomy at OSU that I didn't want to go that route. So then I went like the research route of sciences. Biochemistry and biophysics was my major for 2.5 years at OSU, a 4-year school. And then I kind of realized that that's really not a route that I kind of want to take. It's potentially a little monotonous. I didn't really see kind of the fruits of my labor with the cliche that means. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of went down the path of some other options at OSU. I think I was a pharmacy major for like a few weeks. Then I went to botany for a few weeks, and that started to interest me on a few things. I ended up working for a virology lab in some botany department that deals with, at the time, was really interesting concept. So they were heavily funded, and so me as a 19 or 20-year-old working, doing like a work study job, getting paid what I thought was a great amount of money, and being able to travel to UC Davis on a plane paid by people from OSU was amazing. But what they were doing was they were trying to get, they were working on Pierce's disease. And these botanists, virologists, that probably never drank wine, were working on a way to get expression of a protein in the grapevine carried by agrobacterium, which is this little bacteria that causes galls, but it also spreads kind of like if you have a cold or a virus, right? And so in that lab, what I was doing was growing little seedlings of grapevines and doing micro tissue propagation of grapevines and having a lot of fun with basically a grapevine from an in vitro standpoint, so like in a laboratory standpoint. And I started to really dig a grapevine as a plant, as a thing, not really necessarily outside from a wine standpoint. And then that just slowly developed into, I'm kind of liking the fact that it's very sciencey, it's very complicated. Wine growing seems to be, started reading some literature. This is not just growing grass seed. Sorry to all the grass seed growers out there that might see this years from now. So I started kind of going towards the plant science route, grapevine route, viticulture, horticulture. That would have probably been getting done with my sophomore year. That's my dog that's whining right now because he's not getting enough attention. So that kind of prolonged me, kind of pushed me towards horticulture, viticulture, right? Mm-hmm. And so by that time, beginning into junior year, I did a lot of work for this botany lab, but I kind of want a little more, kind of a hands-on, the opposite of in vitro, I think X whatever, outside. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up deciding to take a term off and go to Peru, because I have background from Peru. I'm half Peruvian, and we have a lot of history in Peru and in some wine growing regions of Peru. So the Ica Valley of Ica, south of Lima, Peru. That's where a lot of wine grapes are grown, mostly for Pisco, which is a Peruvian brandy. It's not Chilean, it's Peruvian. Comes from Peru. It's made in many other countries at this point, but originated in Peru. And it uses vinifera grapes in an unadulterated standpoint, no oak influence, no other influences other than the actual variety. And so that was like my first involvement in the fact that a grapevine, while it's so complicated from a scientific standpoint, it's also makes a product, an end product, whether it be brandy, whether it be wine, that's also extremely complicated and nuanced. And so then it just started like opening doors into this route of potentially winemaking, fermentation sciences. So there I was in Peru for, 3 months, working in this government-run station of viticulture slash agribusiness. It was kind of interesting. I did a little bit of not a lot, basically. So it really wasn't that. I didn't come out of it knowing how to grow grapes or anything like that, but I got a lot of interesting experience. I was tasked to get a lot of just data on the industry that was, I guess, in the early 2000s, still kind of fledgling. If I remember going into a really nice grocery store in Peru, there might have been, 10 bottles of Pisco and 2 bottles of Peruvian wine, right? And now, today, or at least last year, in the grocery store in Peru, there was probably 40 bottles of Pisco and 20 bottles of wine, right? So things really have moved out there. But at the time, in the early 2000s, maybe that had been mid-2000s, it was just kind of unknown, and I went around to a bunch of the wineries and farmers and just asked, what are you growing? How many acres? And I was tasked to do this because my boss at the time basically knew that he wasn't getting a lot of information because everybody kind of holds in, kind of somewhat secretive, but a guy from the US kind of speaks Spanish, why not? Open book. And so I got a lot of information out from these people that normally maybe wouldn't talk to each other as competitors. And so that was kind of interesting. But so that's kind of, so now we're in my junior year of high school, of OSU. Came back, kind of had, maybe the light bulb really kind of came on then. The science part of grape growing, the actual kind of like end product, whether it be brandy, wine, was kind of all interesting to me. We do have, my family has had some land with some Pisco grapes, and at the time it was not interesting to me, but now it's starting to become interesting. So taking all that back, coming back to the United States, went to my biochemistry, biophysics advisor and said, well, I'm going to definitely make my change, and I'm going to go to horticulture. And then they said, great, you can have a minor in biology and chemistry now, right now. So I definitely went and stopped doing chemistry, biology, all that stuff, and started to hit hard viticulture, fermentation sciences, horticulture. And the final, I guess, layer of my school foundation at OSU, primarily, was, okay, I wanted to maybe make brandy, maybe be a vintner, but that was kind of my route. And then I ended up meeting Evan Bellinger, who you'll probably run into at some point. He's a fellow compatriot of ours at Results Partners. And I met him in some microbiology class. And we were chatting, and he was already kind of in the track of viticulture, horticulture, farming. And we were chatting. We were in like a little wine club at the time. And he made the mention that, all you ever do when you're winemaking is just cleaning. That's all you're doing for about 95% of the time. And then it's really fun for about 5 or 10% of the time. And so I took some of his advice, whether good or bad, and just pivoted just ever so slightly to more viticulture and horticulture, which in hindsight, that's exactly what I prefer. And obviously, the last 10, 15 years has been strictly farm and viticulture. Mm-hmm. And I like it, and I wouldn't have done it any differently because I feel like, from my science background, I really like when things are relatively black and white or they are quantifiable. And if I can do a job and provide grapes that are, they don't have disease, they're in balance, they're not overly stressed, overly vigorous, the requests and quality needs from a winemaker has been done and provided, whether it's leaf exposure or the amount of crop, those are easy. Yes or no, we did it. And whether to me on the wine side, there's a lot of subjectivity in that. And I could make the best wine, I could put my heart and soul into it. And if it just doesn't work well for some wine critic or some little panel here, or it's not the right style because the powers that be at the winery XYZ is going this route, then I'm going to feel crushed, or I could feel crushed. So power be to the winemakers that have very thick skins and an exuberant amount of confidence, maybe, is what they need. So I prefer the easier route of just, yes, we farmed the way you wanted it, or the way it should be farmed, and that's kind of the end result. It's obvious. So that was kind of the final route. Senior year, just about finishing up, realized I need to have an internship with actual kind of hands-on experience. A lot of it's been theoretical, technically, and that's kind of the problem in some universities in general, is you don't have a lot of hands-on experience. And I think in Fresno and in other places, Washington State, they're doing it differently. I think in OSU now, they've been doing it differently. Speaking of that, I think maybe I was the second graduate out of the viticultural option. I think Evan might have been the first, Travis Cook like the third, or maybe we were tied. So it was a fledgling program at the time, right? So I'm sure it's great now. Go Beavers. So anyways, yeah, senior year, needing some, vocational experience, but also wanting to kind of get a little bit into it from my head standpoint. I was in Pinot land in Corvallis, North Willamette Valley. The little bits of experience I've had going and thinning something for the fermentation science guys, or going to, work on a little bit of a crush at the OSU lab, those were all Pinot related, right? But I kind of wanted something different because I like different. All the varieties from either making wine or brandy in Peru are totally different. Obviously, it's very hot, arid, and sometimes humid climate down there. So what kind of piqued my interest were some of those same cultivars or varieties in Peru, which is like Tannat, Malbec, Tempranillo, name a bunch more. And I don't know if I found it. I don't think I'm that smart. I think someone mentioned to me that there's this place in Oregon, of all places, that's doing different varieties, interesting things, not just Pinot Noir, and not at all Pinot Noir. And it's Avicella, and that's kind of a Spanish kind of theme. And I'm, half Peruvian, Spanish. That might make sense. Great. And so I end up, I don't even know how I got an internship. Maybe Earl Jones could probably tell this better. But I think I might have just called up and basically kind of extolled how cool I thought this endeavor was that he was doing, and can I work for pennies on the dollar for you? And he said yes. I don't know exactly how he said it, but I recall it was some form of yes. And I ended up working for him for the summer. It was kind of a longer period because I ended up finishing school a little bit early, and it just was kind of a good period. I think I started kind of in the growing season, like in April, because I graduated, I think after winter term maybe, something like that. Anyways, so that was great, graduated, just about to graduate. I'll get the diploma like in the summer. Had a really high GPA, I think magna cum laude, thinking I was gonna just rule the world, being a vineyard manager. Obviously I started just as an intern. And it was a lot of boots on the ground, a lot of intense, basically salt of the earth work to kind of get a foundation, obviously pruning the vines, even weed eating, doing all sorts of things. But at the same time, which I really appreciate Earl, and a lot of my success in my career, I put on him as having provided this for me, is he really took the time, he and then others at Avicella took the time to really kind of explain a lot of the viticulture nuances and a lot of what they do. And they had basically almost technically a research vineyard, yet it was designed to make money and produce great Iberic varietals. But at the same time, a lot of time and effort and money was spent on a bunch of new, different trials, way to manage whatever vineyard task, and obviously on the winery side, changing some sensory, details or whatever. So that was great. That was my internship. Loved it. After the internship, I know there wasn't a job opening because it's just a small winery, vineyard at the time, but I think I begged or did whatever I needed to do to just continue working there because I really was enamored with what they were doing against the grain, non-Pinot kind of way of farming down there. And so he hired me. Yay! Left school. Again, thinking I was going to really control the world. And I think what I did for like 2 weeks was weed eat because they didn't get too good of a set on their pre-emergent, which is designed to kind of prevent weeds from emerging. And so we had a bunch of weeds like Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot, stuff like that. And so I remember just weed eating at a very low hour rate. Someone that had, magna cum laude honors, thought he knew his shit. But in the end, that was exactly what I needed because, again, I need to, in this industry, you have to kind of come from the ground up. And maybe to get on the soapbox, I don't think that that's happening as much as it used to happen. I think it was good that, I got thumped around a bit right out of school, thinking what I know, to kind of remind me that I need a very basic foundation in order to work with crews, in order to work with winemakers, in order to work with whomever, and know exactly what I'm talking about because I've done it. Whether it's ran the leaf puller or pruned those grapevines or weed-eated those rows upon rows on a hillside because of poor weed management, which that made me want to make sure weed management is on tap. So that started like my career, my professional career, as an assistant vineyard manager working for Earl Jones at Avicella. That started in 2007, and let's see, that went until 2011. Hey, Jackson. And throughout all those wonderful years working there, working my butt off, and really kind of understanding the details of grape growing, at least from a Southern Oregon standpoint, Tempranillo, Iberic varietal standpoint, started to kind of maybe think about maybe some changes. And that was primarily brought on, or the impetus really, because I was quite happy, was I recently got married, and that's a very important facet of my life. And my wife is from Peru, and she's from Lima, the capital city, which portions of the capital city are very cosmopolitan, and she was studying fashion design, which after we got married and she came to this country in 2010, realized that Southern Oregon, Roseburg, Winston area is not the best location to grow your apparel or high fashion design, right? So that was something that was going to maybe make a change at some point, right? And it was kind of a known thing that nobody talked about, maybe, right? And at some point, what kind of was kind of a movement for how I left Avicella was at the same time this position at Results Partners kind of opened up, and I was approached by some of the old guard at Results Partners for something new, and up in the Portland metro area, McMinnville metro area, close enough. We decided that as a family, starting to be a family, that this is the better route for me. So then we went up, said our goodbyes, although not a final goodbye, to Avicella and to warm climate viticulture, to irrigating, to Tempranillos, Albareños, Grenaches, wonderful Grenache, great Grenache Rosé, if you want to have some Rosé, Grenache Rosé. went up to Pinot land, right? Something that I never really didn't really talk about, unless I was at OSU, and right into the Pinot land, and working with Results Partners, and that happened in 2012. And obviously, I've been at Results Partners since. So a few things have gone well. One, I really like Pinot Noir now. After drinking my fair share of pretty tannic, intense wines, whether they're Bordeaux-based or Spanish-based, I realized how wonderful Pinot is for just any time of day, any day of the week, with any food group. It's such a, maybe not chameleon, but it's a very food, day, night friendly wine. It's a very interesting wine. And so that was helpful, right? I didn't feel like I needed those big brawny reds anymore, although where I was, made some wonderful whites. And so, yeah, that really helped maintain this, right? And then the second thing, obviously not the second thing, but working at Results Partners, working in the Willamette Valley, it was not as I assumed it would be maybe a little monotonous in that I was coming from a location that had, holy crap, maybe 7 clones of Tempranillo. How many varieties do we have? Like 10? No, more than that. Maybe we had 20. We had Portuguese, port varietals, and all that stuff, different rootstocks, crazy blocks here, 2 rows here, 2 rows there, and coming to basically kind of the Willamette Valley, mostly Pinot, mostly cane pruning, mostly dry farmed, thinking like, okay, well, this is kind of going to be a little, dare I say, cookie cutter, or kind of just more kind of the status quo. And quickly I figured out that that's not the case. One, just in general, in the valley, there's so much complexity in the soils and in what people are doing, vine spacing and how they're just basically growing grapes. And then secondly, Results Partners, who manages so many different sites, 4 acres here, 150 acres there, and so many different philosophies, organic, biodynamic. I think in 2012, when I showed up, they were still farming about 10% of their acreage organic before it was really, really cool. So it was, that complexity like really helped, I think, kind of really give a lot of enthusiasm and passion to continue on my grape growing career. And so, yeah, been here since. Great wines, really complicated, complex career path here with Results Partners, and a great team. You know, I got to plug that because it's a really great team. We've really had the same senior management team since I've been there, and we've only added to the senior management team, which says a lot. And so even though we're a large company, there's a lot of compartmentalization, and there's a lot of basically support from all different channels that makes us really allowed to get really deep, whether it's with viticulture, with the viticultural team, or basically be able to develop 200 acres like that because we have the manpower, we have the equipment power, and the wherewithal to do all that. So that to me is like, wow, you can get really kind of nerdy, obviously, on some aspects, especially when there's clients that are really interested and they want to push the envelope, or maybe they need to adapt to something differently. But at the same time, there's a lot of nice meat and potatoes farming, which I also like, and I think that some people sometimes forget that we need to remember the basics, right? And so that's kind of here now, and now it's 2021. Thank God we're in 2021 and not 2020. Although with that ice storm we had a week ago, I don't know. Maybe we should just continue looking forward. And so that's kind of like the career path, right, from start to finish. So why wine? Man, 45 minutes later or whatever. Nothing specific, just a bunch of events, right? So there you go.
So tell me about, you had a good amount of experience in Southern Oregon wine and in non-Pinot, non-Willamette Valley. Tell me about the differences between grape growing, farming in Southern Oregon and the wine industry in Southern Oregon, and what you come into. What are the biggest differences between the northern part of the state and southern part of the state?
Without getting political, between the two locations, and I joke, it's not that intense. They're significantly different farming, right? I mean, going down I-5 and you're amongst Doug firs, and then you pop out into basically the Umpqua, and it's like, whoa, oak, oak, madrone, a few pines, a few firs. So it's a significant difference. And the people that are tapping into that and farming it differently, dry farming is tough. I think a few people do it, but that's a very tough scenario. But the guys that have irrigation and do it well, just because you have water doesn't mean you know how to farm and utilize it, are doing good things. And so there's a lot of focus on that. At the time when I was there, I think we might have had one day where it was kind of hazy. I mean, I didn't really recall, and this was in the Umpqua Valley, right, which is obviously different than, Ashland, Medford. I didn't really get the, oh my gosh, there's fires here, this is a difficult thing, what are we going to do? So I can't really speak to that a whole lot. But like from a farming standpoint, it's kind of live or die by water. How we irrigated. We were very technical at Opacella, doing a lot of deficit irrigation and ways to kind of change the morphology of a cluster, depending on when you irrigate and what kind of stress levels you want to do for that grape cluster, that I think is really interesting. I miss that a bit up here, because a lot of the Pinot Noir are small berries anyways, and we don't really need to shrink one of them like we do a Tempranillo that might be as big as my thumb. So yeah, and I think from an industry standpoint, I don't have an answer to this. Where is it a good thing that there's so many varieties and Grenache is awesome and Tempranillo is really yummy and they make a really good Mourvedre? I don't know if that's the route or if they should put their flag on something. I can't speak for that. I think, I don't know, in hindsight, we'll know at some point. Probably there needs to be maybe a little bit of some focus maybe in that, because Mourvedre maybe was a wrong, poor example, but maybe coming from tons of different varietals and wine styles to maybe a few more, several, might improve branding down there. But at the same time, I understand that there's a lot of growers out there that farm Pinot because at the time, the fruit set's a little bit better down in Southern Oregon, a little bit better climate as far as heat units, and so that's very helpful to some Willamette Valley growers or winemakers that are growing, Oregon labeled Pinot that want to have a stronger backbone or a little more color or what have you. And so it's kind of like, yes, maybe a flagship. Call it Tempranillo, call it Grenache, call it Syrah. But at the same time, there's a lot of Pinot out there that helps the overall Oregon brand, and we don't want to deter Oregon as a state because we're trying to wave a little flag here in this corner of the vineyard of the state or in that corner of the state. So kind of complicated, kind of an ambiguous answer, but don't really have a major say on that. Yeah.
Tell me about the transition for you from working at a single site with the varietals you're working with, but the same site every day, to transitioning to a place where you're working a lot of different sites, a lot of different elevations, a lot of different soils, a lot of different climate types. What was that transition like for you to learn all those different new sites?
So it definitely helped me a lot, because normally when we think about, okay, someone's coming from an estate scenario, that's relatively kind of, every vintage is relative, especially if it's an established vineyard. You kind of just get in your ways and you probably dive deep and get into kind of some details because it's relatively stationary, right? Mm-hmm. There was enough going on down south, enough complexity, enough grafting every other year to where coming up north to Results Partners, to where there's all this kind of complexity, I felt like I could crawl. I didn't have to just sit in my little stroller. I couldn't start running or walking, but I could crawl relatively well. So that transition was helpful. Like I said, with the team, I mean, it's kind of a, it's somewhere in between a hierarchy and a socialist kind of scenario, right? I mean, it's a very team-oriented system at Results Partners where, everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and those strengths help those that are weaker and vice versa. So I had not the strongest background in development because we only developed maybe 9 acres where I came from. Never really been on an excavator or a dozer, and so obviously we have very strong development team, a very strong development manager. And so things like that, as I'm working with clients or whatever, I can always know that I got that kind of support. So whether it's viticulture, whatever. So that makes us kind of, there's some idiom with the sum of the parts or whatever, but that's kind of what we have, I think. So, yeah.
Tell me about your initial role at Results Partners. What were you hired for first, if you remember? And how has it changed since you've been there?
I was hired with the title of Operations Manager, and that title has been basically continuing on. I think I have a director in front of that, but that really doesn't mean anything. And my dog doesn't care either about titles. I basically showed up to fill part of the team, part of the senior team, to maintain clients, to work with clients, to find new clients, to obviously at the same time make operations run smoothly, run efficiently. As we get bigger, make sure that we're not getting clunky and we're not losing efficiencies here or there just through operational creep. So that's kind of, it's kind of a little bit of everything. Not really a specialist, although I think I have a pretty strong background in some of the sciences. So some of the pesticide at the time in the early years, I was kind of more involved in, and I happen to speak Spanish. So that was important, obviously. All the senior managers also speak Spanish, but I speak it as well. So, and so that was good to kind of basically working with the crews. And I see my wife staring at me right now out of her Zoom meeting. So that was kind of important because at the time we were using third-party farm labor contractors, right? And many people do. It's, our population of workers, whether they're migrant, whether they live here, whether they're temporary, whatever, a lot of them are Latin-based. And so being able to speak the language and not have any loss of translation in let's do this, don't go this high, pull this many leaves, needs to be crystal clear. And so that was good and that was helpful. And at the time, we didn't even think about this, but a few years later, we were really kind of transitioning towards, let's do this internally. Yes, we can hire from FLCs, and there are some good ones out there. There are some not good ones out there, and there's probably more not good ones out there. And I mean that not from a standpoint of just quality of work, but just quality for the worker, and worker rights, worker pay, worker knowledge of what they're doing, worker safety, worker protection standard. We can really get into that, which I won't. And so by us basically internalizing our labor, which we started that in 2015, which seemed like an earth-shattering, the Berlin Wall is falling. And then now, 6 years later, it just seems like, why didn't we do it sooner? But that took time, and that took people that obviously can speak the language and can kind of understand a little bit of how to make this all work. And so that was kind of, I think I put a key part in, and that's helpful to the bottom line also. Let's be honest, it's a business, and so that works very well when we take out a middleman. Same thing when we're developing vineyards. We don't need to get a third party in to excavate out some rocks and to tip over some ugly fir trees that are in the way of some planting and maintain and beautify some oak trees. We do that ourselves. We have our own excavator, our own dozer, and so same thing with labor. Why have a third party? And so it just kind of made sense from us. And we ended up kind of starting to cultivate this culture that, Results Partners, we have job opportunities, we pay market rates, we train you, safety is focus. The amount of trainings that we've done where people have been like, wow, I never knew that. Wow, so you guys make us not go into a vineyard after 24 hours because the label says so, not just, oh, that's great. So the amount of trying to, it's not necessarily teach because they're not, they understand it, a lot of migrant workers, but it's just been really good to get give the support back and to kind of, I think, cultivate kind of a new culture-ish, you know? So that kind of is an aside right now. But so that's kind of, you know, what was helpful as I was here at Results Partners and kind of making this all work. And now we're like, I don't know, since the last 2 or 3 years, 99% internal labor. I mean, we might ask a helping hand once in a while, but, and you know, that's a lot of people. That's makes for a very stressful admin team, dealing with paychecks and payroll and yada yada. But in the end, it works out well, and I think it helps. And I hope a lot of other entities would do the same. You know, because I think that there's several out there that are not treating, I think, you know, labor appropriately.
So with your role at RP, are you mostly in vineyards? Are you mostly in the office? Are you mostly in charge of looking at people? Like, what's your day-to-day, week-to-week look like?
I think it's always involving. I think, you know, as we grow, you know, you could say that there's more time where it's been several days since I've really been kissing a vine or anything like that. And so, you know, it's just kind of evolved. But we're still quite hands-on as far as senior managers are concerned. We need to be to basically maintain that we all know what we're talking about. And you know, the vineyard industry, and we've talked about this maybe later, is always adapting. It has to adapt, especially in light of challenges that we've got, not COVID related, just other challenges. And so just because I'm the, you know, if someone's the greatest vineyard manager in the world today, they're probably not going to be 5 years from now if they just rest on their laurels and just kind of, I don't know, go to conferences and get on boards and yada yada. And so, you know, while we have a lot of business management, which sometimes that can be trying and complicated, and HR management, which is fun, we need to be involved, and we have to be, especially with new challenges. So yeah.
So let's talk about client relations a little bit. I'm curious, you talked about kind of part of your role being finding, maintaining, developing relationships with clients. Obviously you work with a lot of different growers, a lot of different sizes. Tell me about those relationships. What are you looking for when someone comes to RP with a project or with the potential to hire you? What is it you're looking for on the other side? What do you offer? What can you not do? What do you not look for?
Yeah, so what we don't look for, we often say, and I think that maybe sounds cliche, but we often say yes, but. So, for example, someone wants to plant, I don't know, a lot of acres, but they want to go organic from the start, and they don't want to use any pesticides, although it's really nice to be able to establish a grapevine with more tools in your tool belt, because the last thing you want is a vineyard that is very outcompeted by, I don't know, Mother Nature or other weeds, because you're putting a monoculture inside a environment that is not used to that. So you kind of need to help it. Nevertheless, we say yes, but the costs are going to be more. You know, we're going to have potentially 1 more year towards full production because it's going to be a slower process. Or if there's a grower, or if there's a client that says, you know, I want 5 acres of Dolcetto because my family's from Italy and I just want it. Yeah, we'll do some Pinot, some Chardonnay. I want Dolcetto. Then we'll say yes, but is it internal production? Are you going to make that yourself? Because if it's not, if you're trying to sell it, it might, you know, hurt your revenues, and then that might, you know, come to us as far as lower farming costs, which is tough to do these days. So, you know, for clients, it's just a lot of kind of starting with communication, understanding what it is they want, and what are their goals. Which that's always tough because, like, a lot of people might have goals without really understanding the business, or understanding the costs associated, or the lead time between that plant that you know a year ago when you ordered that plant to then you plant it, and then several years later, you know, you've got a crop and you got to make the wine and you got to put in barrel and you got to put in bottle and age it, if that's your route. If you're trying to sell the grapes, it might be a little bit simpler. But there's a lot of knowledge that you learn like on the way. And so we just try to be, I think the most important thing is advocates to our clients. And our clients are wineries. They are people that live out of state, out of country. People that live on site. People that's their slow retirement. All different types of people, different philosophies. Yeah, organic, biodynamic, conventional, that's easy. But then there's also the, low input. There's the no-till. Name the new cool thing. You can argue the coolness factor or the common sense factor, but that's aside. It's what do you want to do? How do we get there? And what are the realities in that? If it's great, you want to do this ABC scenario, just understand that this is the plan, and you might not get a revenue out of that if you're trying for some interesting certification that somewhere in Iceland provides you. Maybe that doesn't translate into a bottle price increase or a higher cost per ton, but if that's what you want to do, and we're on the same page, we'll go for that. And so I think that like RP especially, we're very flexible. It makes it a hell of a time managing, right? Because it's not like a cookie cutter, well, this is what we do, easy peasy. But in light of kind of headaches and long days and everything, we can really see success in all this. So, being flexible, adaptive, and understanding goals with what's like the end result and the cause. Yeah. So, fun stuff.
Have you noticed any sort of major changes amongst your clients? Are they asking for more?
Yeah.
Different or more complicated? Have their demands gotten more specific? How have they kind of evolved for you?
It really depends on the client, but I think in general, more in the sense that farming costs, labor costs have really gone up in the last, just name a time period, right? 2005, 2010, 2000, whatever. They've gone up and they're going to go up. And then we've got the minimum wage that goes up, which obviously we're nowhere near minimum wage, but there's the creep, and people can really talk about how far that minimum wage creep goes up. So farming costs are getting more expensive. And aside from that, you've got kind of an industry where a while ago, they were maybe smaller vineyards on steep hillsides, kind of undulating terrain, and that made farming costs kind of complicated, kind of cumbersome. Where was I going with this, basically?
What clients and owners are asking?
Thank you. Just this more, just got me blurry, yeah. And so more in the standpoint of, trying to kind of maintain farming costs as much as you can, but at the same time, there's kind of a route of wanting to be different, right? Because at the same time, they're still, as complicated as the soils are, as interesting as the topography is, and your philosophy, your story, deep down it's all, maybe not all, but it's mostly Pinot Noir, right? In the Willamette Valley, or Chardonnay, or whatever. And so how can they kind of break out, maybe, for whatever reason? And so that's something that we're getting more of, whether that's from large estate operations that have kind of a different pivot that they're trying to do. And, we can provide information, but we have to be supportive. Mm-hmm. And, we just have to kind of give kind of the cost benefits or maybe the effects that this will have. But we definitely have to be supportive. Mm-hmm. And aside from the mores, kind of the other bandwidth maybe is also just like efficiency with a capital E, which is very hard to do here. And it's tough when someone, sees an article or sees a video by some super fancy implement in California does 10 things and it brushes your teeth and does everything. And we want to just, let's do that here in this 15.5 acre vineyard on a hillside with several different blocks with kind of an old trellis system. That's also wet from about, mid-October until mid-May. So that's kind of tough, and we like being efficient. I think that just runs things a lot smoother. We're able to do more with less people, less operators, less supervisors, but at the same time, it's not just, well, what they do over there, let's just do up here, right? Now, they're slowly changing some, like, as far as like the future of the farming industry, and I can't really speak to the wine side, but farming, you know, I would say maybe 10, 15 years ago, it had to be like on a hillside, or it had to be, you know, complicated and undulating, and that was just the only way. Now there's, okay, it's a gentle rolling hill. Oh, there's some like open land that used to be maybe, you know, fescue or something, up still, you know, above any frost risk zones. Wow, that's something that's interesting. And what, you know what, that can make really good wine all of a sudden, they realize, because it's in the Van Duzer corridor and it's getting a lot of wind and thicker skins and whatnot. So that's when that happens, when the design lends itself to become more efficient. Super, let's do it. Let's multi-row farm, let's do multiple row spraying. Let's do multitask farming where we're mowing at the same time we're in-row cultivating. But you need to have kind of the foundation to do all that. And so sometimes we get clients that want to do all that, but they are kind of in a scenario where they just can't. And so that's a tough spot to be in with, you know, and it's not really a subset of a vineyard size or a vineyard location, but there's just some that are just, it's in between, like that ability to kind of adapt. And so, yeah, there's going to be, I don't know, there's going to be changes afoot, because either they're going to have to go really vertical, and that means maybe bye-bye to results partners, or bye-bye to selling fruit and maybe making their own wine amongst the hundreds others, and trying to get kind of a better return on that, or, I don't know, adapt heavily. And so that's kind of where I see as like, it's kind of going to be a challenge. Those that kind of were married to some confines of the site. Yeah, and I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, but our client would want an answer, at least a professional opinion. And so that's why we, coming back to like RP, we're not just sitting on our hands thinking, yeah, we farm a lot, we're really successful. Great. We need to be thinking about those guys at the same time that we work with maybe a 90-acre new development that's made to be very efficient. We need to think about, well, okay, if we replace the trellis at a high cost, we can do this, and that's going to save money X amount a year for the rest of the life of vineyard. How much life of the vineyard is left? Well, let's say maybe 40 more years. This is starting to pan out. Or, you know, hey, you know, on the side of just merging and acquisitions, so you're trying to sell your vineyard. You know, there might be some entities that are looking for vineyards, maybe some estate productions that, although a vineyard is small here and small here and small here, but maybe this estate vineyard needs some control of their fruit source, and so they want to purchase some small vineyards. So you get more efficiencies through maybe same equipment that's moved around, or the ability to have the capital to make changes like grafting over Pinot Gris to maybe Pinot Noir. So that's the things that kind of we can help kind of bridge to maybe some of those clients that are in that kind of feel like they're an island maybe. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, changes. You know, the future is going to be different, obviously. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about that. Obviously, labor, mechanization, but both those are big issues in your field. Tell me what the changes you've seen in terms of labor in the state and in terms of mechanization in the industry, and what you kind of see for the future of both those things.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, it's increasing. Labor costs are increasing, just in general, which, you know, is a good thing and a bad thing, because you know, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever years ago, probably labor was taken advantage of. Not by all, but maybe by just the general kind of sense. And so with that, with more opportunities to go to school, more opportunities of whatever, there's been a smaller labor pool. And that's just, I don't think it's going to get better. And so then you start paying more of a premium for labor, or you can mechanize. Mechanization, there's a lot of opportunities, but just as I was saying, there's a lot of vineyards that just can, no matter how incredibly fruitful the mechanization is, if it doesn't fit, if it's a square in a round hole or whatever, it just is not going to work, right? There might be at some point, but the capital intensive nature and kind of making that happen, it's not going to work for a retiree with a 10-acre vineyard. It might only be if it's part of a larger estate model. So, yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, the beauty about Oregon, I think, with the boutique kind of atmosphere and small batches and kind of starting out, is needing to change. And some of those original sites like that, or even wine style, might have to change too. I mean, I can understand, from a consumer standpoint, where wine is in certain generations that are even younger than me, and so they've got challenges on that front, obviously, big challenges. And so on ours, from a farming standpoint, we can only do so much with efficiency. And yeah, I don't know, hopefully there's a little bit of inflation on grape prices and to then match some of the inflationary nature of materials or labor. I wonder about, as labor starts to move, I don't know what's going to happen as far as, the next step. I know in California, labor is significantly different, more expensive. There's ag overtime. There's a lot of things that are happening. And so I don't know what's happening here. I'm not going to get into that or get political or anything like that. But we should learn from our neighbors at least, and at least have a concerted effort to as an industry, to kind of go a certain route that is kind of good for everybody and good for the industry as a whole, rather than just either dig in our heels and get slapped with something, or just get completely caught by surprise, right? So, because it has been helpful to see California, and Oregon is not California, California is not Oregon, but at the same time, a lot of the things that were maybe some challenges 10 years ago for them or 20 years ago, maybe we're starting to see, so yeah, then that's kind of a bigger thing, maybe more of a closed-in session on how an industry is going to figure that out, whether it's developing vineyard land, urban growth boundaries, labor, all that stuff. Seems like interesting challenges. Not existential, but just, challenges. Yeah.
So obviously you've seen your share of vineyards now. I'm curious, when you're looking at an existing vineyard or looking at a particular plot of land that might be a vineyard, what are you looking for? How do you judge a vineyard that you're going to be working with, or a site that you might be working with? Yeah. What are you looking for, and what are your kind of biggest sort of concerns / attractions?
Yeah, and a funny story about that. So I think another light bulb in my head for going toward the farming of being a vineyard farmer, grape growing, was I started to, when I driving a lot, I started to look at the landscape and be like, oh, that place, south-facing slope, interesting, warm climate variety. Or, ooh, that little north knoll could be, and this was kind of in the southern Oregon area, oh, that might be some cool climate that we can put down here. And so anyways, that was turning me to my farming away from fermentation sciences, I think heavily, was when I just started looking at land as a way to produce grapes. So anyways, aside from that, but yeah, so what am I looking for specifically? I mean, for us, a lot of times we are we're called upon and the land's already there, right? And so that's kind of interesting, because maybe there's some challenges with that land per se. And, how do we make this the best site it can be for the client, for the wine style, for the grapes? So that's one route. If we had our druthers, I mean, what kind of land we would want, what kind of things we'd be looking for. It's so dependent, because if you want to grow kind of meat and potatoes, Pinot Noir, because you're a large client, or you're, I don't know, the Harvard Fund, and you want a couple hundred acres somewhere, those requirements, or that kind of what you need for land, is significantly different than if you are from New York and you have your heart set on a beautiful Oregon landscape with some acreage to make fine Pinot Noir. Both can be fine Pinot Noir, but I would say significantly different topography. So kind of a cop-out to your question. It obviously needs to, it needs to work for the future. And I think that's maybe the most important thing when we look at land. And if we're given the opportunity to, like, as an interested client, let's find some land available. We need to look at how can, whatever we do now, 20 years from now, or Alex, what kind of dumb idea was that, right? So whatever we do now, it needs to be able to be, I don't know, adaptable, right? We need to be able to have land that maybe is kind of like the Goldilocks thing, maybe not like insanely steep on a south-facing hillside, because who knows, 20 years from now, that might be too darn hot for some nice Pinot, food-friendly Pinot. Same thing, with, I don't know. I mean, you could just get kind of wrapped up into it. So, yeah, it's really depends.
Some more question for you about the various sub-AVAs in Oregon. Obviously, you've seen many of the AVAs in Willamette Valley. Probably worked with most of them. Tell me about the sort of adaptations you need to go from AVA to AVA, and what the kind of unique challenges or features are for some of them.
Well, I mean, Southern Oregon to the Willamette Valley, including sub-AVAs, challenges. Obviously, I mentioned that you really kind of need water down in Southern Oregon. It's not a deal breaker, but it almost is. Up north, same scenario. One could say, oh, you never need water, but at the same time, it's a kind of a nice thing to have, even up here, even after 10 inches of rain, in April. Because, if your wine style is such that you want to have, or your soil profile is a very thick, happy soil that needs some tonnage in order to have a balanced vine, that's nice and balanced. But then the last month where it's really, really hot and dry and you get some east winds from the gorge, you really wish you had some little bit of water to drip on. So, I don't know. Challenges are kind of everywhere. They're kind of similar. Specific sub-AVA challenges, or AVAs. You could get really deep in the weeds. The Willamette Hills, maybe my area, maybe of focus is a little more in the Willamette area. You've got a lot of wind out there. Obviously, it kind of gets hit from the Van Duzer corridor. And so any kind of like pesticide, whether it's herbicide or fungicide, can be challenging because you really got to think before. I think that you maybe have a little bit less of that in some other regions. And yeah, the soils, personally, I think sub-AVA or AVA aside, volcanic soils, Jory-based volcanic soils, to me, they're so much more uniform. They're down to China. They're really deep, and they're not as undulating, obviously, in what Mother Nature gave us. And so it's, dare I say, easier to farm. Maybe you're dealing with some vigor issues because it's maybe a vigorous soil, but at least you kind of know what you get, and it's a little more uniform. The sedimentary soils, which, depending on the height of the Willamette Hills, you could be knee-deep in all of it, or just lap into some Jory. And same thing, even in the Dundee Hills, if you get a little lower, and everywhere, basically based on elevation, right? So that's interesting to farm, and that's a lot tougher to farm. And just case in point, when you talk about maybe a client that wants to go all organic, and they just love the idea of their buddy that is up in the Dundee Hills that does indoor cultivation, and it cuts like butter, and it's just great, and it's just, you can do it today, tomorrow, next week, next month, it doesn't matter, because it's a really nice soil from a mechanized standpoint. If you have some kind of cracky, kind of funky soils, I don't know, multiple different kinds, Helmick, Hazel Air, I don't know, Stewer, Shahulpum, whatever, those get really soupy about now. And so, oh, it's a dry day. Well, you can't really get your tractor in. Can't do any in-row cultivation. Well, then we wait too long and they get really hard and tough, and now you're breaking your sickle bar, or your sensor has to be so strong that you're actually knocking plants. So that's kind of some complexities that like nobody really maybe thinks about from the client standpoint. That yeah, let's definitely do what your neighbor does, but what your neighbor does in a different area is going to be maybe different for you. So yeah, little challenges, but makes it interesting at the same time.
What about relationships with winemakers and with your clients? Obviously, there's an interesting history of relationships between vineyard managers, winemakers. We know. I'm sort of curious. You have a lot of different people to keep happy with a lot of different expectations, a lot of different demands. Tell me about building those relationships, making it so both sides feel like they're getting something out of it.
That's tough because RP is interesting because we are a service provider. We don't own any land, we're not a winemaker. And so, there's times where you could say it's simple if you're the client and you just sell a bunch of fruit to winery X. Okay, well, I just need to make sure you're happy and do everything good for you and be your advocate, because ultimately if wine buyer, they can come and go potentially. Obviously we need to be talking with the wine buyer and involved with the wine buyer, but if the wine buyer is wanting to do 10 different things, we need to run it by the client. There's other scenarios where the wine buyer and the wine owner are the same thing, right, as the client, like an estate model, and where we're in to do a service, and they're, they themselves are maybe sometimes struggling from the vineyard side, trying to make sure something's efficient, or to to do something with some common sense. But at the same time, there might be other avenues that need to be done that might seem like either they might not make a lot of sense, or it's going to be a costly endeavor, or whatever, or that's going to affect something else. Where it's going to do great, but then the potential for botrytis is going to be higher. So it's tough because we're like the children in like a relationship or whatever, right? Maybe not the children, maybe like adults in an adult relationship. The key, how we survive, because we are surviving, we are doing well, that relationship is, I think, just uber communication. We are like, at least at RP, email and now it's texting, which can be kind of tough at times. You're always on. But we want everybody to be in the know, and okay, you want this, you're cool with this, it's all good. I mean, it just seems kind of like, I don't know, just kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but we just need to make sure that communication is like key, which sounds so cliche, but so many times, buyers and growers, or even buyers and growers in the same company, might not be talking to each other, right? And so as long as we're there, and I think making sure that goals, and whether the goals are financial, qualitative, quantitative, are all kind of in the know with everybody, then we're pretty much golden, unless someone's just irrational, right? And you always have a few of those. But yeah, I think we do quite well. And every harvest is fun and insane at the same time, especially last year. Last year was mine. I've only harvested for 15, 16 years. Has been the most challenging, insane, physically demanding. I know I didn't have COVID, but something hit me because I got tested. I was negative. Something hit me during harvest. It was just and I think it was just exhaustion, and not just exhaustion, just brain exhaustion, right? But even that harvest, looking back, I mean, that was just kind of a war wound. It's a nice, I survived 2020, and there's going to be, hopefully not to that extent, but there's going to be other years like that where it's going to rain 6 inches in mid-September, like in 2013, right? Or all of a sudden the labor is just going to be gone. Where did it go? And that's going on a tangent now. That's kind of exciting, but also intense thing about farming grapevines. And obviously taking that And explaining that to both clients, buyers, whoever's involved, is the key. And so, yeah, we send a lot of emails, we read a lot of emails, we write a lot of emails, or phone calls or texts or, pigeon messages, anything we can do. Yeah. But yeah, and I think we really appreciate not as RP, but like as any kind of farmer or grape grower, with when a winery or a winemaker is a little bit understanding or flexible of some of the things challenges that we're dealing with, just kind of simply communicating a really complicated task into Spanish to a bunch of laborers that might not have any kind of idea on what the end result and why, and you're thinning this portion of the cluster because that ripens less and that makes sense for whatever reason. If they can we can get some buy-in that, man, that's kind of complicated. How about you just do this? We will fall in love with you. So it's kind of like, same thing. And I hope at the same time, the winemakers fall in love with grape growers when we're able to say, instead of hell no, that doesn't make any damn sense. You know what? That's interesting. I see where you're coming from. You've got to kind of push the envelope. It's going to be more expensive. Are you cool with that? Is the client cool with that? But let's try it. And hopefully we just get goo eyes. So yeah, so we both need to kind of play nice, right? And we both have separate challenges. But I think there's a little more, maybe it's a little more controlled. Well, maybe I'm going to get some punches in the face from winemakers. But it's a little more controlled environment, maybe, other than the first couple weeks of fermentation, to where our life is minimal control. I mean, we're dealing with Mother Nature, which doesn't care about your wine style or whatever. And we're dealing with labor and all the nuances and complexities and compliance and safety that supersedes a lot of your wine style. And that's every day. I mean, today is different than tomorrow, and then tomorrow's going to rain, so we can't do that interesting yeast spray on the vineyard. We need to do it now, but you couldn't get a hold of me because you're selling wine somewhere, and so we can't do it again because it's past flowering. I mean, it's all that stuff. So, that's kind of the challenge, and we really appreciate those that understand that and work with us. Yeah.
On that note, do you find that, especially with new clients who haven't had a vineyard before, perhaps, do you find that the expectations are fairly realistic or reasonable coming in, or do you find you're doing a lot of reframing their
I think it's all across the board, which is again interesting because it's different and it makes us stay on our toes. But some clients can come in and they can be really down to earth and kind of common sense wise, and that doesn't mean that they're boring or that their story is not going to be successful. And then there's other clients that are wanting something that is just going to be very, very difficult to achieve. And like I said originally a while ago, we rarely say no, and not because we just like to just have an insane amount of stress in our lives, but it's kind of a challenge, and that's the way to kind of get the industry flowing. If we were just so stuck in dogmatic ways, then the industry wouldn't grow as much, and we'd be a few thousand acres of boutique wineries every year, and as Oregon, Washington surpasses us, now Texas, now Virginia, now and then now Oregon's just an even smaller slice of boutique high-end wineries that people outside of some metropolitan area doesn't know about. So, saying yes and let's try it are all good things. Yeah, but it's, again, we try to give some opportunities for, you're going to go that route. Well, these are the potential consequences, or these are the risks. Just risk management. I don't know. Yeah. So all across the board, and again, we have so many different. It's not just one person that wants to have that because they drank some, some beautiful bottle from somewhere that now they want to have 10 acres of vines. They don't care how much it costs. we have many different other growers. We have institutional people that want to invest in land, want to invest in grape farming, that have vastly different goals and objectives than that person that wants a 10-acre vineyard that they can sit up in their jacuzzi and take a look at what they've got. And all those should have space here in Oregon, all those different kinds of clients, because it will make the pie of Oregon bigger amongst all the other slices in the world. We just need to make sure that everything is being grown and developed in a sense that we can adapt, right? And I mentioned that before. I don't know. We've probably said no a couple times if it's disastrously, if costs are disastrously low, or if it's in terrain that it just really is going to bury you from a financial standpoint, right? There is a no maybe a few times at RP, yeah.
Talked about 2020 a couple of times. Obviously, a couple of different challenges there. I'm curious first about the pandemic, what effects it had on your work and obviously on your labor force, and the kind of adaptations you had to make over the past year. And as we come out of this, hopefully soon, what you see maybe changes you made that might stick around for the future.
Yeah. So we were blessed as an ag entity, and on the ag side, of not having, not disastrous, but not having like insane amount of changes, right? We were blessed with working outside in a crop that by nature is primarily spaced apart, right? Literally 6 feet apart. I think our average spacing is like 7, or if you average it weighted, it's like 7.5 or whatever. So, but nevertheless, on the office side, vast different changes. Which is the kind of the most difficult part is like how we do our safety training and how we do our kind of just group kind of, not even sometimes training, just meetings where we're having a bunch of tacos and it's just kind of a camaraderie standpoint. A lot of that has really suffered. And that's kind of been the biggest change, the deleterious change for our company and probably other farming companies. While though we've all been working, none of us had to stay home on any kind of lockdown from the standpoint of we were blessed to have outdoor work and essential ag work, which wine is essential. So there you go. I feel more for the winery side, whatever level, of size. We all know that the bigger boys maybe did a little bit better than some of the smaller routes, but still difficult for everyone on there. We had to, obviously there's OSHA compliance changes, and we, as a solid company, follow all that, which we can't say the same thing about other FLCs or even other, farming entities. Mm-hmm. And so costs did go a bit up in general to some of these things, sanitation practices, which kind of poked a little bit more added salt to the wound or whatever, because it's a tough year. And even before, not before COVID, in COVID, we had a really horrible fruit set, right? Really low, horrible, maybe not the right answer, but really, really, really low fruit set. And so like as a grower who just gets the revenue from the grapes, they're getting hit with that, low yields, tough year, and then all of a sudden, now you need twice as many bathrooms because we need to maintain a higher sanitation protocol. So that's kind of tough. We made as much lemonade from lemons as we could here at the farms that we farm for. Going forward, there's always a chance to be a little complacent, right? And we still have a face covering policy outside. So if you're within 6 feet, you're wearing it. And in general, all the crews, we just kind of wear it because it's much easier just to keep it on than take it off. And so, that's something to just, on a senior management standpoint, is when do we start kind of, reverting back to quote unquote normal? Mm-hmm. That's going to be complicated because None of it is as what the professionals say. It always seems to be different timelines. And so for farming wise, I don't know. I feel like some of the sanitation protocols are going to stay. I mean, so then that's just another added cost, an elevating cost to farming that a lot of owners, growers are going to have to eat. Some large, expansive, efficient vineyards can handle that. Others, it's another kind of poke to maybe a small, complicated site that's hand labor only, and now you got to add this cost and you got to do this, and so it's kind of, it doesn't help those kind of sites. Those kind of inefficient sites are going to become more inefficient. And I can't really speak to like what's it going to do to, I don't know, like on the wine standpoint. I don't really know. I think we're going to have some exuberance of a lot of imbibing once this is getting kind of dealt with. A lot more parties with wine and other spirits. But I don't know if this is going to kind of change the game of where there's going to be more conferences like teleconferences rather than thousands of people showing up at the symposium, although I loved that. And we had it, I don't know, a week or so ago, and obviously a bummer for everybody because that kind of networking, the kind of elbow rubbing and everything is just so important to our very personal industry. So I hope that we can get down to the point of where, it's going to be flu-like and, nobody stopped the world for the seasonal flu. But we're not there yet. Because I sure want to get back to rubbing elbows and slapping people on the back and yeah, I miss that a lot. Like I said, it's a people industry. Most of what I've been talking about now is with humans, not with vines, right? And that's something they didn't teach you at OSU, is you're going to be, a vineyard manager deals with people and then vines on the side. So yeah, very personal industry, and I'm hoping we can get back to some of that personalness with the crews, with just employees, and then obviously with the industry, compatriots. Yeah.
And obviously the other 2020 crisis was, of course, the fires at the harvest.
Forgot about that.
So tell us, you mentioned your own personal harvest was rough. Tell me about harvest for RP last year and how you kind of got through that additional crisis.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say RP as a whole, I mean, we had a successful harvest because we not only, obviously nobody had any accidents, and that's one of our first levels of success or not. And we were also able to sell a lot of fruit, I guess you call it, in the secondary market, or to other buyers that were willing to work with the fruit that other buyers just didn't want to touch for whatever reason. I won't get into that. This is not a time for that. But whatever happened, and we need to do something about it. And we could have just sat on our hands and said, well, that's a lot of fruit to sell, and I don't know. I mean, do you have insurance? Which most people didn't have crop insurance. But no, we tried very hard. And the good thing about RP is we know a lot. We're a large company, so we know a lot of people looking for fruit, people looking for this, production, etc. And so we were just basically putting two together and making that really happen in the middle of harvesting every other day, or every day, really, every day. We mandated K95s, KN95 masks during kind of that peak because while some wineries or some growers said, no, thank you, we stopped, there were others that said, please, can you pick my grapes? Because they felt that it only was going to get worse, or whatever their reasons are. They just wanted them picked now, and for whatever reason. And we wanted to continue being the company that says yes, but. So it's like, yes, but just so you know, all we're going to do is pick grapes. We're going to have the minimal amount of people out there. We're not going to be foo-fooing and touching leaves and spending more time doing this and that and taking care of removing the net delicately. No, we're going to go in and pick the grapes and get out because we want to minimize exposure, right? So that was, it's like I said, like making lemonade again from lemons. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of tons that could have sat and rot. And not that RP was the reason for that, but I think the industry as a whole, several very wonderful wine teams, entities, companies made the change to continue working with that. And it might bite them. I don't know. I guess it's still to be determined. So we'll see. But yeah, that's under our belt right now. So, and one last thing is I think that I have to give props to our team, everybody from the leaf pullers up to the coordinators, myself, Evan Bellinger, the coordinate harvest. We had guys and girls just put their head down and just get it done. And in the time of COVID, in the time of fires, in the time of everything. And that's done not from us, it's from everybody. So, ¿qué pasa?
It didn't rain frogs or anything while you were out there, though. There was no pestilence.
No, but with ice storms, plagues, what else we got now? Yeah, I'm worried about that.
It's been quite a year.
Yeah.
Tell me about the future for yourself and for Results Partners. What do you see as you look ahead for yourself, and where's the company going?
Yeah, so what I see for myself is a baby girl in about a month and a half or 2 months. That's kind of what I see right now. It's hard not to see anything else other than that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I personally, this is kind of a great place to live. Career aside, Oregon, I feel fortunate to be here in this area. And so that's just, to me, seems like it's kind of the forever zone, right? Mm-hmm. Now we have the ability to travel. We used to travel a hell of a lot. We're going to get back doing that. And we're mandated to go to Peru often because half my family's there and all of her family's there. Maybe we'll retire there, who knows? But I would like to just continue growing, doing what we do, which, RP expands. We're in Walla Walla right now. We've obviously been in Southern Oregon for a while. Just as I was leaving Albacela to go up north, they were starting just at like the same day or whatever, kind of an RP south in Southern Oregon. Mm-hmm. And so, I'd like to see RP grow. And I'd like to see the industry grow. I'd like to see Oregon continue to move, kind of forward and not kind of rest on kind of some past laurels. Mm-hmm. And then RP, we just need to continue, while we don't forget our foundation and what got us here, we need to continue kind of to adapt. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's like a slow adapt. We don't need to beta test everything, right? We don't need to do that. But we need to kind of be somewhat on the forefront.
Mm-hmm. You talk about Oregon moving forward. What do you see for the industry as you look ahead? What are the changes that are coming, concerns you have, and what does the Oregon wine industry look like to you in a decade?
In a decade?
Or even next year, however long in the future you want to look.
I think there's probably going to be some amounts of consolidation, mm-hmm. and that seems to be inevitable. I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing. But there's going to be there's a subset of the size, the topography or whatever, where it's going to be really challenging to make it pencil out. And we talk about sustainability from a Mother Nature standpoint. There also needs to be economic sustainability, right? So I see that things are going to have to change in efficiencies. or a major change would have to occur, whether they sell or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then other challenges from a standpoint of probably, a labor. I don't think 10 years from now we're going to be like New Zealand that has little to no labor, but we need to plan for that potential, right? To be highly mechanized and still attribute highly mechanized to high-end premium Pinot Noir. If there's anybody still, even now, today, thinking that things have to be hand massaged and hand pruned and hand cut and hand leafed and hand whatever to still make premium wine, I mean, that's becoming should be coming out of favor. And if anything in the future, it's going to become more. So, yeah, that's the future. We need to, I mean, my humble opinion is we need to still maintain what kind of makes Oregon a kind of a brand that is different than the big beast south of us or other states or other countries, but still be adaptive. And that might mean some of the things that we kind of maybe held dear with some boutique-ness or some ways of farming might have to kind of move. And so it's not like, a new thing might not, it's not always a complicated thing. It's not always, a fanciful thing. It could just be simply, well, we need to get more efficient. We need to have wider spacing, and maybe we can do that because now we're down off of the hillsides and maybe thinner soils and now into some kind of benches where the thicker soils kind of warrant a few more buds per vine and thus a wider spacing. And not just be dogmatic with, well, we do spacing because 10 years ago we got a 94-point vine, whatever, and we want to maintain that. So I think, yeah, Oregon can, if we just adapt half a pace faster than the rest, but not lightning fast, I think we'll be in a good position. And yeah, with climate change, that's going to be interesting. Like, maybe 100 years from now, we'll be able to grow awesome, Tannat and Petit Verdot, what they do in Ica. They're not going to be able to do anything but raisins then. But between now and 100 years from now, the whole variability in climate, that seems to me more of an issue than just I can't grow Pinot anymore on this south-facing hillside because it's too warm. I think with the ice storms, the polar vortexes, the super hot years, the forest fires, whatever, for whatever reason, not getting into political, feels like there's more variations. And so how does a monoculture that's supposed to sit in the ground for 60, 70, 80, 100 years, whatever years, handle that? Well, again, and I've said this before, getting to that Goldilocks zone of maybe not finding this most insanely ripe site, not finding the site that's relatively unripe, where you're going to not cut, but somewhere in between, or maybe having a diverse land, having the ability to have a nice site where you have some south-facing, some north-facing, you've got some denser plantings, you've got a few different cultivars or varieties so that you can kind of, it's almost like hedging, like your portfolio for your retirement account, right? So if we can still obviously wave the flag of Pinot, but kind of do that in a little bit more diverse way. Spur pruning, we're like 99.9% cane prune, right, in the Willamette Valley. And there are certain reasons for that, and there's certain dogmatic reasons for that. Maybe at some point that kind of moves in, which will greatly help in mechanization, but then potential, we need some more consistent fruit set at the same time. And maybe weather will help with that, but who knows? So, yeah. I don't know. 10 years from now, we'll see. We'll still be around. Our people will be around, and the Oregon wine industry will be around. And hopefully we're not just drinking White Claw or anything like that. Yeah.
All the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that you'd like to cover?
No. I think everything's gone. I think I needed to definitely give a shout out to Earl Jones, which I did. Who else should I shout out to? I already shouted out to my wife, who was staring at me up top in there. The dog, a bunch of times.
You're part of this interview too, bud.
Yeah. No, I think so. I appreciate the time.
Excellent. Yep. Thank you so much for your time today, for your stories, for sharing your perspectives and your story, and we'll let you off the hook.